There are 5 common mistakes that newer or beginner knitters often make. I'm going to show you these. They're all fixable, but if you make them, and you will make them, you'll know how to correct them, and you can possibly avoid making as many of them as possible. One thing people often do when they're starting a new row that is wrong and increases the number of stitches is to look at this last stitch, which will be the first stitch in the next row, and think, oh, that looks a little bit looser than the rest of the stitches. I can fix that by pulling this over. That makes it tight. But then there are 4 stitches there rather than 3. And if you do that every row, your piece is going to get wider and wider. So don't do that. That's okay if that is a little bit loose. When you start working the next row, it tightens right up. So we're going to just knit across. We get to our marker, and then it's time to purl. Another mistake people make is when they're switching from knit to purl or purl to knit. Rather than taking the yarn between the needles, they take the yarn over the top of the needle and start purling. That gives you this diagonal stitch that looks funny across the needle. And it looks even more funny when it's right by a marker. But sometimes it's not by a marker, it's just there. If you see a diagonal stitch that looks obviously different from the rest of your stitches across the needle, that means you've taken your yarn over the needle. When you work back to that stitch, you can just slip that yarn over off, and it will end up being down here below your needle. I'll show you that when we get to the next row. Okay, here we are coming up to the funny diagonal strand of yarn across the needle. So we're just going to continue until we get to that. There's the last stitch before it. And then we're going to just drop that off the needle and continue on. We made a mistake and we fixed it. No harm. We still have the same number of stitches. Again, this whole swatch is 36 stitches. There are 3 stitches on each border, and there's 10 stitches in each of these sections. And having it divided into sections like that makes it easy for you to count either while you're knitting or before you knit the next row. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on, so that you can just verify that you have the right amount and you're going to continue in a rectangle rather than making it into a funny polygon shape that's not really a trapezoid or a triangle, but it will get wider and wider rather than staying parallel on each side. We put our knitting down. It's been a couple of hours or a couple of days or maybe even a couple of weeks since we've knitted. We pick it up and we're itching to get started. I do see that the yarn is coming out of this stitch, and I pick it up and I think, well, let's go. And I start going the wrong direction. And that makes more rows on this side than this side. And it also creates a bit of a hole here. But sometimes you don't see that until a little bit later on. We'll go ahead and we'll go to the end of this row. And then we'll turn around and come back and we'll see what happens. Again, this is not an insurmountable mistake. It happens, and it is definitely very fixable. we're going to just purl over to the spot where we started, and then you're going to see really what the harm was for starting in the wrong direction when we picked it up the last time. And we just knit along. And maybe we set it down again, and we come back later and we see a bit of a hole there. On the other side, a bit of a hole there. You can see it. It's not terrible, but it is there. So if that happens, that is a rip back situation. And you can either stick your needle into the stitch below, slide that loop off the needle, and go one at a time to knit backwards. Or as you get more experienced and braver, you can take those stitches off the needle and pull them out. We're going to go all the way back to where the mistake happened, which is right before this marker. And then we'll get those stitches back on the needle. There's our marker. There's our last stitch. So I'm going to just stick that back on the needle, put our marker in. We should have 10 stitches here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And then these still have the stitches from the row before, but an easy way to get them back on is to just go one stitch at a time. And that mistake is fixed. You're here, you put your knitting down. Maybe the kids or grandkids are playing around and you pick it up and somehow you pull a needle or a stitch off the needle. Oh, that's scary. This one has slipped down a couple of stitches, but that is very fixable too. In stockinette stitch, it's easiest to fix it from the right side. So we can slip that stitch up on our needle, and we can put the first ladder, so you can see there are 2 strands of yarn that are going across there. This is the one that's closest to the stitch, so we're going to pick that up, and we're going to take that stitch over the yarn and over the end of the needle. Now we need to do that one more time to get it back up to the current row. Dropping a stitch. It happens to all of us, but it's easily fixable. Okay, the last thing that new knitters often do is knitting or purling in the wrong place. Now on this little swatch, the first 3 stitches are knit, and then we switch to purl. But if we forget and we go ahead and knit, then we have a mistake, and it will look a little bit funny on the other side. This is the right side of the fabric, which is smooth and has these V-shaped stitches, but there we've got bumps rather than V's, and that needs to be fixed. And again, we can fix that right now very easily by unknitting. We can fix it later by laddering down and pulling those stitches up the right way. But the earlier you see a mistake, the easier it is to fix. There we go, that is fixed. We've taken those stitches out that were knit rather than purl. And then we're going to start purling. We're not going to take our yarn over the needle, we're going to take it in between. If you like what you saw today, please hit the like button and subscribe. Leave me a comment if you have any comments or questions.